Shalom, Kahala Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rakaha Kadash. Double honors to the apostles, elders, and bishops of Great Millstone. Salutations to all my fellow laborers doing this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives to do so. To the scattered, hopeful elect across the four corners of the earth, and those among the heathen nations that look like the heathen nations, pursuant to Jeremiah 12:9, known as the speckled birds. This is not a so-called black thing, nor do we teach that. Okay, and according to Romans 8:16, the spirit beareth witness with our spirit. Then that person, if they understand the truth of the word, according to the spirit, then that person can be an Israelite. All right. So I am Disciple Apariam, a follower of Great Millstone, coming to you with a lesson in truth and sincerity. This lesson is going to be titled Paul Used Guile. And this is a reference to, I think it was some Edomite that came over to the GMS Orlando camp and was speaking with the elder over there, right? And trying to say that essentially in Acts 26 that Paul was trying to convert Herod Agrippa, and that is anything besides the point, aside from the point, and that's not so. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the meaning of guile and talk about it within the law as well, and how give some examples of how the Israelites used guile, especially against their enemies. Okay, so guile is in the Old Testament, Strong's H6194, is irama, goes into trickery, or in a good sense, discretion, guile, prudence, subtlety. And I had to look up this word, willili, or wisdom. So that willili means an act of crafty deception, slyness, or a calculated strategy to trick others. So then the adverb appears in the KJV to describe calculated manipulation. In a sense, that situation with Paul, using guile, if you look at the picture above, you have to consider guile to find out what's going on. All right. And, self-preservation in a sense. And that's what he was doing. And he was appealing to Herod. And I'll get into that later on as well. Now, guile in the New Testament, is an example of 2 Corinthians 12:16. Slacking. Let me pull that up. This is the example that he was using. It's and it reads, "But be it so, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you with guile." All right, this is Apostle Paul speaking, right? He says, "But did I make a gain of you by any of them whom I sent unto you? I desired Titus, and with him I sent a brother." It says, "Did Titus make a gain out of you? Walked we not in the same spirit? Walked we not in the same steps?" So he didn't gain out of that. Okay. So let's go to Matthew 10:16. This is it says, "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." Right. And speaking unto the 12, before they were going out to do their ministry, right? So that's how we are, out and about, especially, I work with Jake and all that. We gotta be, use guile in a sense, right? Because this is spiritual warfare. This is 2 Corinthians 2:11 in the NLT, so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with the evil schemes. Okay, so essentially, along as well, we're not to let our left hand know what the right hand is doing. Okay, so this is a quick rundown of Acts 26. Paul's opponents, they tried to ambush and kill him to save, it says, to save himself and to share his faith. Paul carefully adapted his message to connect with the king's. Here is his Jewish background, but essentially you got to remember that the Herodians were Idumeans, right? And Idumeans were essentially force converted to be to assist the Maccabees within their war that they were going against with the Greeks. Okay, and that was a huge mistake by John Hyrcanus. So it says here, it says the plot and the players. Because essentially Agrippa II, I think it was the grandson of Herod the Great, because Agrippa's father was killed by Herod the Great, and so Agrippa was sent to, I think somewhere in Italy, in Rome area, to not have to suffer the same fate his father suffered. And later on, as he grew up, he became a leader in that Judea area. So here's the plot and the players. Agrippa II, the last king of the Herodian dynasty. He was the Roman friendly ruler who oversaw the temple in Jerusalem. This is the ambush. It says the Jews who were at the time, Judah, Benjamin, Levi, who were left, religious leaders wanted Paul dead. And so they planned an ambush to kill him on the way to the court. The trial, to protect Paul, Roman leaders moved him to Caesarea, and the Roman governor Festus asked King Agrippa II for help deciding what to do with Paul, because you got to understand the Herodians again were converted along with the other Idumeans, right? And in that sense as well, you also had some Amalekites that were absorbed into the with the Herodians and with the Idumeans. But anyways, Festus asked Agrippa, because Agrippa was understanding of their laws, as far as the Israelites' laws and the customs, right? So he was like, "Hey, what do I do with this man?" And so here it says Paul's guile or clever strategy. Some critics believe Paul used clever, two-faced tricks, guile to escape death and to manipulate the king. So Paul changed how he spoke, to match his audience, right? It says to Romans, Paul relied on his Roman citizenship. And he did that many times, to save his life, to preserve his life, right? And it says, here it says to the Jewish leaders, we know that's the Jews. Paul reminded them that he was a strict Pharisee. To King Agrippa, Paul highlighted that both he and the king believed in the Israelite, scriptures and the prophets. And here's the results. Agrippa's reaction. Agrippa realized Paul was innocent of his crime worthy of death, and he jokingly told Paul, "In a short time, you would persuade me to be a Christian." Like Paul knew, like, hey, this is the person that converted, right? And was not serious and did not care. And he knew that the Spirit was not upon these Idumeans, and knew the fate that they're going to suffer. Okay, he's like, you almost got me. You almost got me to believe. And remember, they weren't even called Christians; they were really Hamashiachim, all right, and following of the Messiah. Paul's freedom. Agrippa and Festus agreed Paul could be set free. However, because Paul had previously played his cards and appealed to Caesar, he had to be sent to Rome for trial. So essentially, Paul was not trying to convert Herod Agrippa II, because Paul knew Agrippa again was an Idumean, and he was using guile as our forefathers did during acts of war, self-preservation, and in saving our nation. Says Paul definitely was familiar with Herod the Great's role in trying to, essentially murder Yahushua, right? So this is this ministry that we have is a ministry of reconciliation, and that's going to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 18 and 25. And so let's go ahead and get that real quick. Let's see. Bear with me for a second. Lucky 17 to 19. So let's go back. And it reads, therefore, if any man be in Hamashiach, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. This is 2 Corinthians 5 and 17. It says, behold, all things are become new. And all these are of power, who have reconciled us to himself by Yahweh Shai, Hamashiach, and have given to us ministry of reconciliation. Now, what is that reconcile, right? And the reconciliation is to, let's see, return to favor with, be reconciled to one, right? So essentially, I want to give an example, right? If I go to some random woman out in the street, be like, hey, baby, how you doing? You know, hey, let's reconcile. She could look at me crazy. Reconcile what? I never knew you. You know what I'm saying? So that's what these Christians do. That's the doctrine of, what was it called? Supersessionism. Okay. So let's go back to 2 Corinthians. And it reads, this is 2 Corinthians 5 and 19. It says, to wit, that power was in the Mashiach reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and have committed unto us the word of reconciliation. And again, when you get that word world, Isaiah, I believe it's 45 and 17. It says, but Israel shall be saved in the Lord Yahweh with everlasting salvation. Ye should not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. Right? So stop playing, Christians. Anyways, let's go to Romans 9 and verse 13. As it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Okay, this is Apostle Paul speaking. All right, you don't think he knew all this when he was speaking to Agrippa II. He was just appealing and changing his style, you know. So let's go to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 16 and 17. It says, lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For ye know how afterwards he would have inherited the blessing. He was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he had sought it carefully with tears. All right. So, and these are, tears of regret they're completely different from tears of conviction or or remorse. And he didn't have no remorse, right? And this is a picture right here from the Zondervan Dictionary Bible. It says Edom figures prominently in prophetic scriptures as the scene of great future judgments. And then you got Isaiah 34 and 5, verse 6, and then Isaiah 63 and 1. It says, she is the only neighbor of the Israelites who was not given any promise of mercy from power. And Paul knew this. Quit playing, and take a screenshot if you don't have that yet, So the question is, how did Herod come about? Again, I explained this. So Herod, the Great, married the Hasmonean princess. And when it says Hasmonean, that goes into the Maccabees, right? And her name was Miriam the First, often just called Miriam. And he married her to gain legitimacy, because here it says Jewish, but when we talk about the Northern Kingdom, people wanted traditional royal leaders. Miriam's famous royal bloodline gave Herod the support he needed to rule securely in Judea and oversee the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Now, when you look at that, this is basically where these small hats get the idea of, oh, well, my mother is so-called Jewish, right? And so that's how they trace their lineage, but that's completely off and against Numbers 1 and 18 that says that they trace their lineage by the seed line of the fathers, by the, essentially. So let me go ahead and get that real quick. So I don't want to butcher that. So they go against their own word, and they get that whole process from the Herodians, right? It says right here, Numbers 1 and 18, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upwards by their polls. Okay. All right. So yeah. So the question is, another question right here says, who made the Idumeans convert, and where is this found? The Idumeans, also called the Edomites, were forcibly converted to Judaism by the Hasmonean ruler John Hyrcanus I around 125 to 129 BCE. So this historical event is recorded in the ancient, it says Jewish historian or Israelite historian Flavius Josephus in the book of Jewish Antiquities, book 13, chapter 9. All right, that's where you find that information. So the result is that the Amalekites were absorbed into the Idumean population. And Amalek is the great grandson of Esau, making them, the head tribe. We're in all these situations and all these problems in the world because, they are in the land, put there by means of, by the stroke of the pen via the Balfour Declaration. All right. So according to the Bible, so the Israelites used deception against adversaries during warfare and for self-preservation. This is going back into the law. This is while the law condemns lying for selfish harm, scriptures show strategic deceit being used to protect lives, ambush enemies, and win battles. Warfare and self-preservation. And here's an example of strategic ambush. It says Yahweh commanded the Israelites to use military deception such as lying in ambush and feigning retreats to defeat opposing cities such as Ai and Joshua's 8:3-8. Protecting spies, Rahab deceived the king of Jericho to safeguard Israelite spies. I mean, she was not an Israelite, but she can receive, she could be blessed in the kingdom, amongst the Israelites. Let's see. Here in the New Testament, it praises the act of faith and self-preservation. Hebrews 11. Let's go there real quick. Hebrews 11, and I think verse 31. And it reads, by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. So it's just kind of going into that example right there. Now, self-defense. The law permits an individual to defend themselves against immediate unlawful threats, such as nighttime attackers. For example, Exodus 22, 2-3. And then also when you go into the law, it says it's supposed to say, thou shalt not murder, because there's a difference between murder and kill. Okay, kill is protection in time of war, self-preservation. So we get the law versus warfare, personal sins. It says the moral law strictly forbids bearing false witness and lying to one's neighbors for selfish, malicious, or dishonest reasons. Proverbs 6:16-19, Proverbs 12:22, and then you see Christians be like, oh, well, see, it says thy neighbor, right? No, you go to Leviticus 19:18. I'm gonna read the NLT because it makes it clear. The cut to you stupid ass Christians. And it reads, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, Yahweh. I can't even break that down. It's clear as day. Okay. So national preservation, deceiving the enemy in an open war or conflict is viewed differently. It says the Bible distinguishes between outright lies to your neighbor and strategic concealment utilized to deliver Yahweh's peoples or preserve life from an aggressor. A good example that I was thinking about was the one with Esther, or also known as Hadassah, who tricked Haman in that second dinner with King Artaxerxes, and essentially preserving the lives of the Israelites. So with that, I pray that Aki and Makwath were able to understand Guile in a sense, the Old Testament and New Testament, and examples, and that whole Acts 26 BS with Agrippa II, and supposedly Paul was trying to convert him to be a Christian. That wasn't the point. Okay, so with that, I pray this lesson was edifying. On to the next. Shalom and a ball.